Right now, across 3 different continents and across thousands of miles of open ocean, the edges of the largest tectonic plate on Earth are firing off in rapid succession. Within a single extraordinary window, a violent magnitude 7.4 earthquake tore through western Colombia, shaking the northern Andes for over 2 straight minutes and leveling structures across 12 departments. Days later, a massive magnitude 7.2 earthquake ruptured deep beneath the coast of southern Peru, triggering immediate coastal alerts and sending shockwaves rippling through the central South American Cordillera. And almost simultaneously, on the exact opposite side of the planet, the Indonesian archipelago, spanning the Flores Sea and the volatile Sunda Banda Arc, was rocked by its own series of severe magnitude 7+ seismic detonations. 3 massive earthquakes, 3 separate subduction zones, hundreds of millions of people feeling the ground buckle beneath their feet in the same global news cycle. When events like this happen back to back, the internet floods with immediate panic. The comment sections light up with catastrophic theories. Is the Pacific Plate breaking apart? Is the Ring of Fire experiencing a chain reaction? Are we on the verge of an unprecedented global megaquake? Today on Crust and Storm, we are stripping away the conspiracy theories, bypassing the low-effort alarmism, and looking directly at the raw geophysics, real-time satellite telemetry, and deep mantle seismology. We are going to break down the exact physics of what just happened in Colombia, Peru, and Indonesia. We are going to look at whether these massive ruptures are truly communicating with each other across thousands of miles through dynamic stress triggering, or whether what we are witnessing is the brutal, uncushioned reality of a planetary engine that never sleeps. Drop a comment right now below. Where were you when you first heard about this string of earthquakes? Have you ever felt a major seismic event in your life? Tell me your location and your story. And if you rely on Crust and Storm for hard-hitting, verified, and deeply scientific natural disaster investigations, hit that subscribe button right now. Let us get into the data. To understand whether these events are linked, we must first reconstruct the forensic timeline of each individual rupture. Event 1, the Northern Andean Snap, Colombia M7.4. The sequence began with an extraordinary release of energy in western Colombia. At 7:34 a.m. local time, an earthquake officially measured between magnitude 7.4 and 7.5 detonated at an intermediate depth of roughly 110 kilometers beneath the Choco-Valle del Cauca boundary. Because of its intermediate depth, the seismic energy did not waste itself in a localized bullseye. It radiated upward like an expanding cone of destructive force, shaking 15 departments, killing over 300 people, compromising more than 160,000 buildings, and sending shockwaves traveling hundreds of kilometers across the northern Andes into Ecuador and Panama. Event 2, the Nazca megathrust tear, southern Peru, M7.2. Before emergency services in Colombia could even finish clearing the initial mountain landslides, the seismic network further south lit up. Off the coast of southern Peru, near the town of Yauca in the Arequipa region, the plate interface snapped. A magnitude 7.2 megathrust earthquake ruptured along the Peru-Chile Trench at a shallow depth of just 28 kilometers. Unlike the deep Colombian event, this was a shallow subduction interface rupture. The seafloor was violently thrust upward, triggering regional tsunami warnings from the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center and the Peruvian Navy, DHN. Coastal highways collapsed into the sea, ports ceased operations, and structural damage rippled through towns built along unstable desert slopes. Event 3, the Indo-Australian Sunda Crucible, Indonesia, M7.0+. Then, the global balance swung 10,000 miles to the west. In the complex tectonic collision zone of the Indonesian archipelago, where the Indo-Australian plate, the Eurasian plate, the Pacific plate, and the Philippine Sea plate grind against each other in the most congested tectonic knot on Earth, a powerful magnitude 7.0+ earthquake ruptured along the subduction interface. Deep underwater structures shifted violently. Coastal communities across eastern Indonesia rushed to high ground as automated warning sirens blared across fishing villages and regional capitals. 3 massive earthquakes registering magnitude 7.0 or higher, all touching the tectonic margins of the Pacific Ocean basin in the same compressed time frame. To the casual observer looking at a news app, it looks like an undeniable chain reaction. But to a seismologist, this is where the real mystery begins. The Pacific Conveyor Belt, the engine of the Ring of Fire. To understand what is happening beneath our feet, we have to pull back our perspective and look at the colossal physical engine driving all of this, the Pacific Plate. The Pacific Plate is a gargantuan slab of oceanic lithosphere covering more than 103 million square kilometers, nearly a quarter of the entire surface area of the Earth. It is not a static platform. It is a dynamic, continuously moving conveyor belt of cold, dense basalt. The perimeter of this giant plate, and the smaller tectonic plates locked in collision around its margins, forms what we call the Circum-Pacific Belt, or the Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire is not a single ring. It is a horseshoe-shaped gauntlet of subduction zones, transform faults, and volcanic arcs stretching from the southern tip of Chile, up the spine of the Andes through Peru and Colombia, along Central America and Mexico, past California's San Andreas system, through the Aleutian Arc of Alaska, down through Kamchatka, Japan, the Philippines, and finally wrapping through Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and New Zealand. Every single second of every single day, the Pacific Plate is diving into the mantle. Along the western edge, Japan and the Marianas, it is sinking at up to 100 millimeters per year. Along the eastern edge, where the related Nazca and Cocos plates interact with South America, it is colliding at 50 to 70 millimeters per year. That means thousands of miles of rock are continuously being driven downward under billions of tons of lithospheric pressure. Why did Colombia, Peru, and Indonesia rupture almost together? To answer that, we have to look at the three radically different subduction engines involved in these events. Look at the mechanics at play here. These are three completely different geological failure modes. 1. The Colombian rupture, the slab that snapped from within. In Colombia, the earthquake did not occur on the friction surface between the two plates. As the Nazca slab plunges beneath the Andes, high pressures and temperatures force water out of the hydrous minerals inside the oceanic crust, a process called metamorphic dehydration. This trapped high-pressure fluid fractures the rock from the inside out, triggering what seismologists call an intraslab earthquake. The slab itself snapped 110 kilometers down under extreme tensile stress. 2. The Peruvian rupture, the classic locked spring. In Peru, just 1,800 kilometers south, the mechanism was entirely different. Here, the Nazca plate had been locked against the South American continental shelf since the last major regional rupture. The continent was being dragged down and compressed like a coiled spring. On the day of the earthquake, the static friction failed. The upper plate sprang upward and outward by several meters, releasing over a century of elastic strain in seconds and displacing the Pacific Ocean water column above it. 3. The Indonesian rupture, the multiplate collision grind. Across the Pacific in Indonesia, the geometry is even more chaotic. Indonesia does not sit on a simple subduction zone. It sits on a tectonic meat grinder where three massive plates, Eurasia, Indo-Australia, and the Pacific, are crushing smaller slivers of crust against one another. The subduction interface along the Sunda and Banda arcs is under continuous, multi-directional shear stress. When you analyze the focal mechanisms, you see three distinct engines, an internal slab tear in Colombia, an interplate megathrust slip in Peru, and an oblique subduction crunch in Indonesia. Now we must tackle the single most important scientific question. Can an earthquake in Colombia trigger an earthquake in Peru? And can that trigger an earthquake across the ocean in Indonesia? To answer this, we have to look at the two distinct ways earthquake energy travels through the Earth: static stress transfer and dynamic triggering. 1. Static stress transfer, the immediate neighborhood. When a fault breaks, it permanently alters the physical stress on the rocks immediately surrounding it. Using Coulomb stress failure models, scientists can calculate where stress was relieved and where it was concentrated. However, static stress transfer drops off exponentially with distance. Its reach is limited to roughly 1 to 2 fault rupture lengths. Meaning a magnitude 7.4 earthquake can only statically load adjacent fault segments within a radius of 100 to 200 kilometers. Distance between Colombia epicenter and Peru epicenter, or sim 4800 text kilometers. Distance between South America and Indonesia, sim 18500 text kilometers. Static stress from Colombia could not physically reach Peru, and it certainly could not reach Indonesia. 2. Dynamic stress triggering, the long-distance waves. This is where the physics gets fascinating. When a magnitude 7.4 earthquake ruptures, it sends low-frequency surface waves, Rayleigh and Love waves, traveling through the crust around the entire globe. These waves transiently compress, stretch, and shake distant rock formations as they pass through. Can these dynamic waves trigger distant earthquakes? The answer is yes, but almost exclusively under very specific conditions. Extensive studies by the USGS and global seismological teams show that dynamic triggering primarily triggers micro-earthquakes, magnitude 3.0, or hydrothermal swarms in places that are already on the absolute brink of failure, such as geothermal fields and volcanic calderas. Almost never triggers a major magnitude 7.0 plus megathrust earthquake on an unrelated plate boundary thousands of miles away. If dynamic triggering were capable of systematically unzipping major faults across entire ocean basins, every magnitude 8.0 plus earthquake in history, like Tohoku 2011 or Chile 1960, would have initiated a cascading global apocalypse of back-to-back megathrust ruptures across the planet within hours. That has never happened in recorded geological history. The conclusion of modern seismology is definitive. The Colombia, Peru, and Indonesia earthquakes were not physically linked by a mechanical chain reaction, so why did they all happen at the exact same time? The reality of what we are seeing is not a mysterious planetary breakdown. It is a classic demonstration of statistical clustering and the sheer scale of global plate tectonics. Look at the math for magnitude 7.0 to 7.9 earthquakes. On average, the Earth produces 15 to 18 major earthquakes every single year. However, earthquakes do not follow a tidy, human-engineered calendar. They do not distribute themselves evenly, like clockwork every 20 days. Seismic events follow a stochastic, Poisson, process. In any random Poisson distribution, events naturally cluster together in time. You can have 3 months with 0 magnitude 7 plus earthquakes, followed by a 2-week window where 3 or 4 major ruptures occur in rapid succession purely through random temporal distribution. When that cluster happens to hit populated areas across the Ring of Fire, which already accounts for 90% of all global seismic energy, it creates the overwhelming visual impression of a synchronized planetary crisis. What has changed is not the fundamental rate of tectonic movement. What has changed is our global awareness and urban exposure. 1. Ubiquitous real-time telemetry. 50 years ago, an earthquake in rural Chaco or offshore Peru took days or weeks to be fully reported in global newspapers. Today, within 15 seconds of P-wave detection, automated push notifications hit 8 billion smartphones. 2. Exponential urban encroachment. Over the last 6 decades, human populations living directly along active subduction margins have exploded. Millions of people now live in megacities built atop soft alluvial basins, volcanic soils, and unreinforced infrastructure. The Earth is not shaking more violently than it did 500 years ago. There are simply vastly more human beings, concrete structures, and smartphone cameras standing directly in harm's way. While these 3 earthquakes did not cause one another across the ocean, each individual rupture has dramatically altered the local seismic hazard in its own backyard. 1. The Central Peru seismic gap. The magnitude 7.2 earthquake off southern Peru released stress along a specific, isolated segment of the subduction interface. However, just to the north lies the infamous Lima, Central Peru seismic gap, a 400-kilometer stretch of the subduction zone that has been completely locked and accumulating strain since 1746, over 280 years. Seismologists warn that the central gap holds enough accumulated elastic energy to produce a catastrophic magnitude, 8.5 to 8.8 megaquake, directly offshore from Lima's 10 million residents. The recent M7.2 event did not relieve this locked zone. It served as a stark physical reminder that the subduction engine off South America is actively loaded. 2. The Colombian aftershock sequence and landslide crisis. In Colombia, the danger is immediately physical. Intermediate depth earthquakes produce prolonged aftershock sequences that continue for months. Weakened masonry structures, damaged highway bridges, and saturated Andean mountainsides remain at extreme risk of secondary collapse. With over 31,000 homes destroyed and vital mountain transit routes severed, the humanitarian struggle across Risaralda, Valle del Cauca, and Choco will require years of sustained reconstruction. 3. The Sunda megathrust, Mentawai Gap. In Indonesia, the recent shaking along the eastern arc leaves the most dangerous segment of all still primed, the Mentawai patch of the Sunda megathrust off western Sumatra. This locked segment has not had a full margin rupture since 1833, and sits ready to unleash an ocean-crossing tsunami when it finally fails. The simultaneous shaking of Colombia, Peru, and Indonesia is not a sign that the planet is falling apart. It is a reminder of what this planet actually is. Earth is not a dead, rigid rock floating frozen in the vacuum of space. It is a dynamic, living, heat-dissipating planetary organism. The same tectonic forces that tear open the ground in Colombia, buckle the highways of Peru, and shake the islands of Indonesia are the exact same processes that created the Andes Mountains, built the fertile volcanic soils that feed billions of people, and maintain the planetary carbon cycle that keeps our atmosphere breathable. You cannot have the beauty of this planet without its geological violence. They are 2 sides of the exact same coin. We cannot stop the Pacific Plate from sliding. We cannot weld the subduction zones shut. What we can do is build resilient cities, demand rigorous engineering standards from our leaders, educate our communities, and replace blind panic with clear, uncompromising scientific understanding. The ground across the Pacific Basin is shifting. The plates are finding their new equilibrium. Make sure you, your family, and your community are prepared for the reality of the ground beneath your feet. Thank you for watching Crust and Storm. Subscribe to stay ahead of the science, drop your thoughts and earthquake experiences in the comments below, and we will see you in the next investigation.